Hey guys, we're going to talk about how we got here. By here, I mean in our society. How did we get to where people think the way they do, especially when it comes to riots and liberal philosophies? Right after this. So, hey guys, welcome to Woke with Wes. I am Wes Herndon, one of the co hosts on the Driveway Liberty podcast. And I wanted to come to you today because, I have a tendency to think deeply about certain things. And you may or may not be into that, especially with me, coming to you on video. But I hope you are, and I hope you'll follow my line of thinking on some of this stuff. A few weeks ago, I talked about the Linsky method and how liberals are doing anything within their grasp with any means necessary to gain power in this world. Well, today I want to talk about one of the ways in which they are doing that, and that's through our education system. You see, Alinsky lived through, I think, the late 70s, and so if you look at our education system over the last 40, 50 years, it has dramatically changed. It has changed in several ways. It's changed in how things are taught. It's changed. It's been infiltrated by liberal people who have liberal ideologies, progressive ideologies. I don't like using the word progressive because that sounds positive. And I don't think the changes that have been going on have been positive. But, things like history have been replaced. And I'm going to show you stats in a minute that back some of this stuff up from studies. History, and a lot of people call it revisionist history. Well, revisionist history is not necessarily a bad thing. Because a great example would be George Washington's teeth. A lot of us in kindergarten and first grade were taught that George Washington's teeth were wood. Well, upon further inspection, they're actually ivory. They just have stained and look bad. And somebody started perpetuating the fact that they were wood because they looked like wood. Same story with the cherry tree. When you go to George Washington's childhood home, there was no record of any cherry trees or no archaeological finds or botanical finds that would show that cherry trees were ever growing on that property. So little things like that have been where we revision the history, where new data gives us ideas. That's okay. That's all right. What is not good in teaching history is relativism. Truth is truth. Facts don't care about feelings. However, teaching an idea of relativist history, and I'll get to a definition in a minute, but an idea of a relativist history is is judging our ancestors based on today's moral standards. Slavery is a great example. We have a tendency to take the fact that a lot of our forefathers in the United States were slave owners and push the narrative that makes them evil people. So we want to wash away all of their great ideas and their great accomplishments based on the fact that they perform this evil, which we do in today's society and for the last 100 some odd years. Consider slavery as an evil enterprise. Nobody would denounce that. The problem with it is judging them by today's moral code, whereas prior to 1867 and in slightly earlier years, slavery was deemed appropriate throughout the world. In some places today, in the Middle East, for example, in some parts of Africa, it's still deemed appropriate. So slavery has existed since the dawn of civilization and probably before. And in some ways it still exists today. And I think we can, most of us, reasonable people, can agree that slavery was terrible. It was a terrible thing. But however, we cannot overlook the accomplishments and the great ideas of of historical peoples based on that idea that slavery was evil. Same thing with imperialism. We can't look at England today and or Rome for that matter and say, okay, you're evil, guys. You're evil today based on what your ancestors did several hundred, if not thousands of years ago, especially in when we're talking about Romans. So what's going on in school today that liberals have infiltrated. And I'm about to show you a stat here. Let me see if I can find it. So here's a portrait of America's K12 educators. 41% of respondents, and this is a survey done by Education Week, and this was back in 2017. Now, I know this was 3 years ago, but if you look at a similar study that was done in the 70s, these numbers have remained relatively the same with the exception of independents versus Republicans. So 41% of respondents described themselves as Democrats, 30% said they were independents, and only 27% were Republicans. Half of all respondents voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, 29% voted for Trump, 13% selected a third party. So that shows you, and this is K-12 educators across the country, a sample of those, and not saying that there aren't conservatives in education. I'm not saying that at all because I personally know several. However, those running the curriculums and the education system are not Republicans. They're not conservatives. They don't hold conservative values. So that being said, looking at this poll here, and this even gets worse on the collegiate and university level. So you can look there, and it increases to about 60%, saying that they're liberal. About 48% saying they're liberal. About 40 some odd percent saying that they are actually moderates, and then a small smidgen saying that they are conservative. So from an ideological spectrum, liberals are running your education system in the United States, and that's across all platforms with the exception of privately funded or certain private schools, and even some of those are run by liberals. So now we can get into the whys and why nots of why liberals are attracted to education. There's more liberals in liberal arts education, sociological, social sciences, basket weaving, feminist studies, gender studies, things of that nature. So obviously when they get into education, they can say that they do their best to be impartial. But I'm going to quote one of my own college professors who was admittedly liberal. And it was a sociology professor. And, one of my favorite professors. I love the guy, even though politically we were different. But he said all science is slanted by ideology. And there's no dispute in my mind that that's the case. We have a predetermined outcome in just about anything we do. And his statement of telling me that is made me strive to be a critical and independent thinker. It's amazing how that statement's there. But as we've seen in several instances over the last several years, that attempt at impartiality and critical thought is not really there anymore. So with all of that being said, I don't want to get into the whys they're attracted to that, but I would like to go over the textbook definition of historical relativism. It's the theory that there can be no objective standard of historical truth, as the interpretation of data will be affected by subjective factors, characteristic either of the historian or the period in which the historian lives. So my take on a historical event, according to this definition, is different than anybody else's because it's dependent on the historian or the period. It's a matter of perspective. That has very little truth to it. I won't say it doesn't have any truth to it, but it has very little truth to that. You can look at the reasons, and you can look at the documents of a period, and you can look at the general consensus of thought of a period and determine intent. And that's where we get into historical relativism, is a lot of interpretation of intent of what our forefathers did. You know, they were just rich landholders who wanted to protect their own interests. Well, you know, there's argument to be made for protecting your own interests and how it serves others. And that argument is generally made in an economics class for capitalism. So anyway, that being said, let's move on to the 2014 National Assessment of Educational Progress. Now, this is something that's sad. 18% of U.S. high school students were proficient in American history. That sounds like a positive statement. But that leaves, if my math is accurate, 82% who were not proficient in American history. So, and this is a study that's done every few years, depending on subjects, by the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And then that's available online. Matter of fact, there's more recent studies there's a civics study that's out as of 2018, which is a little newer. Why I chose this 2014 study is because that's 6 years ago. So if we look at these riots and all of these people looking for looking for communism and wanting to just basically overthrow our free market economy, you can look at that was 6 years ago. So those kids are in college, just out of college. They do not have an understanding of American history. So therefore, they don't understand the free market economy. If they don't understand American history, they don't understand economics. If they don't understand politics, they don't understand how the world works. So they're misguided, and they're wrong. So when somebody that doesn't have a profound understanding of history says we have systemic racism in this society, they're repeating something somebody else said. So there you go. You ask yourself, you look at what's going on in the news today with the riots, and I know a lot of people are like me, and they're saying, how in the blue hell did we get here? Well, this is how. Liberals have taken over education, and they're playing the long game. They're playing the long con. They are beating conservatives and liberty-minded people to the punch, because what they've done is they've spent 7 to 8 hours a day with our kids. Those of you that don't, I won't say our kids, we homeschool. They spend 7 to 8 hours a day with your kids, and they mold their minds. They take away critical thought, and they say, this is the way it is, youngster. This is how it is. And you don't have to take my word for it. There are hundreds of cases where conservative parents have uploaded copies of tests that have been given by teachers. And even, and you say, okay, another problem with the education system, and I forgot to talk about this, so I got to bring this up. When I was in elementary school and middle school, my teachers had degrees in their subjects. My history teacher had a degree in history and political science, or citizenship, or civics, or social studies. My math teacher had a degree in math. My science teacher had a degree in science. My English teacher had a degree in English or literature. Now, ask your child's teachers what their degrees are in. We're not teaching our teachers their subjects anymore. We're not teaching them to be experts on what they're teaching. We're teaching them to be experts on how to form minds. So that's something that I think is an issue with modern education in the United States. So if I were wanting to take over the world, Dr. Evil, first thing I would do is I would have like-minded people take over the education system. Once some of those individuals got to voting age, I would institute them in grassroots efforts to perpetuate my ideas to others and try to bring about the revolution I wanted based on my ideologies. So, I'll leave you with this. If you want to take back control of your country, you've got to be thinking about the long game too. If you're liberty-minded, you need to be instructing your kids on liberty and what liberty means and how that applies to free market economics and how that applies to social mobility and their opportunities to do better in life than you've done or to better themselves. Because if we're all getting the same thing for different efforts, that's not a fair society, which is the exact opposite of what your education system is teaching. I'm Wes. I hope you're woke, and I really hope this wasn't too long, but it's probably going to be. We'll see you next time on the Driveway Liberty podcast or Woke with Wes.